If you've been in a car accident and your vehicle was repaired, you've got a diminished value claim. If you have that claim, you probably are confused, don't know how to properly value it and argue it to an adjuster to get the compensation that you deserve. That is totally understandable. I hear it all the time. And that's why I want to give you 4 of the most important tips I can think of as an attorney to help you handle your diminished value claim correctly. So what are those 4 tips? The first one, most important, don't accept the 10% rule. We'll talk about what is the 10% rule, when is it going to be presented to you, and how to fight against it. Number 2, don't accept the first offer. Seems pretty understandable, right? Well, we're going to talk about what really is the first offer, because that's most important with this tip, and then how to negotiate from there. So don't accept the first offer. Number 3, you may need an expert. That's okay. It's okay if you need an expert. We're going to talk about when you likely will need an expert, how much the expert's likely to cost, and what kind of expert am I even talking about. And number 4, probably the most interesting tip I can give you coming from an attorney is you should not need to hire an attorney to handle your diminished value claim. Save the money is the concept, and use these tips to help properly fight for the compensation you deserve for your diminished value property damage claim. So let's dive into all the tips. The first one, most important, 10% rule. What is it? This is an argument made by the adjuster, typically right out the chute at the beginning. You're going to get this beautiful letter that says, we understand you have a diminished value claim. Here is some case law, and here's what a diminished value claim is worth under the law. And aren't we so generous? We're going to go ahead and give that to you right now to wrap this all up. Well, as you can imagine, red flags, right? They're never going to give you everything that you're owed right out the gates. So should be skeptical. What is the 10% rule that they're arguing? Well, they're going to cite some case law that says, oh, 10%. You're only owed 10% of what? Now, here's where the second red flag kicks in. They argue it 2 different ways depending on what's the cheaper amount for them. Number 1, they'll argue it's 10% of the value of the repair costs. That's what you're legally owed. We can't pay you $1 more because that's what the law says. So, for instance, you got a $98,000 GMC Tahoe. And yes, unfortunately, those do cost about that much nowadays. You've been driving it about 3 months, so it still has most of its value. It's probably worth about 90 grand at this point. You get in a T-bone wreck, it damages the passenger side door, and it's got to be fully replaced. And let's say that costs, just for easy math purposes, $5,000 to do all that work. So they'll come to you immediately and say, great, here's the case law. We're right. We're just being honest and telling you what the law says. It's 10% of $5,000. Here's your $500. We've resolved the diminished value claim early and quickly for you. Aren't we great? No. As you can imagine, that diminished value claim on those numbers is way higher. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. You don't want to accept the 10% rule and be faked out by this presentation of case law and get nervous that you don't know the law, et cetera, et cetera. Now you do. Okay? The other way they argue it is, oh, it's 10% of the value of the vehicle. That seems a little bit more reasonable. Okay, I lost 10% of the value of the vehicle. Well, no, you may have lost a lot more than that. Give you an example. You're driving a $5,000 older vehicle. They have $1,000 of repair costs, decent amount of damage. And so they want to give you 10%, not of the $1,000, because that's only $100. They know you're not going to take that. But here's 10% of the value of the vehicle, $500 again, right? No. That diminished value claim, even on a $5,000 vehicle, is going to be more than $500. So you don't want to succumb to this 10% rule argument. People get faked out by it all the time. So now you know. So what do? You respond to them and you say, thank you very much, but actually, this is not law. It is what is the evidence on the actual fair market loss in value of my vehicle, because it had to be repaired and it was in this big wreck. That's it. The only way you're going to know that is to try that case to a judge or jury and present evidence of what someone's going to be paying for your vehicle with a Carfax and everything else showing all these repairs had to be done to the vehicle and it's got repair parts on it instead of new parts. So that's what you're legally owed, not 10% of repair or value of the vehicle. So that folds into number 2, probably the most straightforward advice, which is don't accept the first offer. But what's key to this is what really is the first offer from the adjuster? Well, the real first offer from the adjuster is not that 10% rule offer that you're going to get immediately. I don't consider that an offer at all because, again, it's not the law. Okay, so what I suggest you do is you fight back on the 10% rule. Thank you very much. That's not the law. Here is my offer, $10,000, let's say. So here, $10,000 for the loss of value of my vehicle. Then they're going to look at that and go, okay, he knows the law. All right, we're going to drop the 10% argument. Let's give him something. All right, they come back $1,500. They're still way too low. Okay, don't accept it. Don't think, oh, I got a victory. I beat them on the 10% rule and they've tripled their offer. No, they tripled their offer from nothing. So that offer is still nothing. You want to counter offer. This is where oftentimes, depending on how far apart you are, so if you're 10,000 and 1,500, you guys are really far apart. You're $8,500 apart. You may need to get more evidence to convince the adjuster. How do you do that? That's where an expert may come in. Oh my gosh, how much is that going to cost? Who is it? These are all the questions. All right, it doesn't cost as much as you think. It costs somewhere between $250 and $1,000 to hire an expert. So not horrible. Now, you still want to make a business decision. So when you need an expert, really probably is more on the business decision side. So if you're only fighting over $250 to $1,000, don't get an expert. Just keep arguing with them, get them up as high as possible, settle it. But if you're 8,500 apart, you've got plenty of room there to spend $250, $500, $750, $1,000 to get an expert to be the hammer to say, here is now real evidence of what my fair market value loss is. Who are these experts? They are independent adjusters. There's a lot of them out there. You can Google some in your area, try to find the best one that looks like they know what they're talking about. And what they do is they do a market analysis, look at your pictures, look at the repair costs and invoices and everything, what was done. And they run the numbers and give you this real fancy report that ultimately concludes, here's what your diminished value is, $10,000. You turn that into the adjuster. You say, you've now forced me to hire an expert. Expert confirms $10,000 of my loss. You need to pay me $10,000. Now, again, they're probably not going to pay you $10,000. You can negotiate close to the 10 and try to get it done. This at least gives you the power to say, hey, I've hired an expert. You're just making these arguments on paper, 10% rule, this and that and this. You've presented no real evidence to suggest my diminished value is only worth $1,500. Now, you got to remember, ultimately, in the legal process, the only right you really have is to try your case to a judge or jury. So at the end of the day, you have to present your expert, present his report. It's $10,000. They get to argue the opposite. Judge or jury has to decide who's right, who's wrong, what do we think it's worth. So there's some room for some negotiating even when your expert says it's worth X. But it gives you a guidepost, you want to say somewhere in that range of what your expert is telling you. Now, number 4, you may not need an attorney. You shouldn't need an attorney. Why? Because the cost to hire an attorney versus what you're likely to recover, business decision doesn't make sense. If you're fighting over a $5,000 claim or even a $10,000 claim, hiring an attorney will eat up a good portion of that. Why? Well, it's really hard. So in personal injury law, which is what I do for a living, we're on a contingency fee. So we get a percentage of whatever we recover for our clients. This way they don't have to pay us up front. They're not paying us by the hour. And we work for free in essence until there is a recovery. It is hard to find attorneys that will handle a diminished value claim on a contingency fee basis. Why? Because typically you are only talking $5,000, $10,000 claims versus personal injury claims that are worth way more. So it's hard to find someone that's willing to take a third of $5,000 to do all the work to litigate and fight a diminished value claim. Number 2, best case, it would be 33 1/3%, so a third of it. So you're losing a third of your diminished value claim just in hiring an attorney. These adjusters know that. That's why they're doing it, quite frankly. They know your only option is to go to court. So they're fighting the financial battle with you. You might be able to find someone who's willing to do it on an hourly basis. That may be better if it gets done quickly once you hire an attorney, but you don't know. So it's risky. You hire an attorney, they want $2,500 retainer that's hopefully refundable. They're $300 an hour. You hope they get involved right away and there's a quick settlement. Oftentimes there isn't. Now you're going way up in your attorney's fees, and it could be 50% or more by the time you're done on the value of your diminished value claim. So using these steps, it shows the adjuster that you know what you're doing. They likely will go, ooh, he's probably talked to an attorney or something like that. So that helps. And the hope is you can narrow the gap so much that either one, best case scenario, you can avoid hiring an expert and an attorney and you get it done. Or worst case, you're just hiring an expert. You continue to argue, negotiate, and you can get close enough where it doesn't make sense to hire an attorney. Attorneys are valuable, but really when you're talking about a massive diminished value claim. So you want to think your collectible vehicles, you've got an exotic vehicle, it's worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So your diminished value claim is worth $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 in diminished value. Oh yeah, now it's really worth it. We're talking almost like a personal injury case. To hire an attorney on a contingency fee, they certainly will take it at that point, and the math makes sense. Those are really rare instances. So be careful. Don't really need an attorney. Property damage claims are typically pretty straightforward. Diminished value, not so much, but use these tips. Fight for the most compensation that you can get for your diminished value claim. I hope this video helps you. Comment below. If you like the video, subscribe to my channel. We're going to have more videos coming out all the time on all kinds of different personal injury, property damage, law, and would love to hear comments on this or any other topics you want to hear about. Thanks for watching the video.